What happens when a desperate king, abandoned by God, seeks answers from the realm of the dead? In the dead of night, Saul, the mighty ruler of Israel, walks a forbidden path, his heart pounding with fear and desperation. Rejected by heaven, he turns to a place no man of God should ever go, to the witch of Endor. But when the spirit of the great prophet Samuel rises, a chilling question lingers: was it truly Samuel, or was Saul deceived by a force far more sinister? We will step into the eerie silence of Endor, where the veil between life and death is torn apart. Was this a divine revelation or the ultimate deception? Stay with us as we unravel the mystery of Saul's final night, a night of prophecy, fear, and a fate that could not be escaped. The truth may haunt us forever. Divine Tales presents to you. The Witch of Endor summons Samuel, deception or divine? In this video we will explore one of the most mysterious, controversial, and chilling events in biblical history, the night King Saul sought the Witch of Endor. Abandoned by God, desperate for answers, and standing on the edge of destruction, Saul dared to break divine law to summon the spirit of the prophet Samuel. But what truly happened that night? Was it a divine revelation, or was Saul lured into the ultimate deception? As we journey through this gripping tale, you will discover 1. Why King Saul was desperate enough to seek a forbidden path. 2. The eerie encounter with the Witch of Endor. 3. The shocking moment when the spirit of Samuel appeared. 4. Whether this was truly Samuel or a demonic deception. 5. The devastating prophecy that sealed Saul's fate. 6. The tragic events of his final battle. 7. The powerful lessons this story holds for us today. Stay with us. What you're about to uncover will leave you speechless. Imagine standing on the brink of destruction, your enemies closing in, your fate uncertain, and the very God you once relied on refusing to answer you. This was the terrifying reality of King Saul, a once mighty ruler now left in deafening silence. With his heart heavy with fear, Saul faced an impossible choice: accept his doom or seek answers by any means necessary. But the path he chose was one forbidden, dark, and dangerous. In a desperate act, Saul disguised himself and sought out a witch, a sorceress dwelling in the shadows of Endor. His request? To summon the dead prophet Samuel. But what truly happened that night? Did God allow Samuel to speak from beyond the grave, or was Saul deceived by a demonic force? This story is filled with suspense, deception, and divine judgment. A king battling his worst fears, a spirit delivering a chilling prophecy, and a fate that could not be escaped. Was Saul's encounter a supernatural warning, or was he tricked by the darkness he embraced? As we unravel this gripping tale, prepare for twists, revelations, and a haunting question that lingers through the ages. Was this divine intervention or the ultimate deception? This story is filled with suspense, deception, and divine judgment. A king battling his worst fears, a spirit delivering a chilling prophecy, and a fate that could not be escaped. Was Saul's encounter a supernatural warning, or was he tricked by the darkness he embraced? As we unravel this gripping tale, prepare for twists, revelations, and a haunting question that lingers through the ages. Was this divine intervention or the ultimate deception? In the shadows of Endor, a hooded figure trembles. She has summoned spirits before, but tonight is different. Her hands shake as the air grows thick, and then, a presence. A voice from beyond. A warning that chills the soul. But is it truly him? Or something far worse? The battle dawns. Swords clash, blood stains the earth, and prophecy becomes reality. A king falls not by the hands of his enemies but by his own despair. And as the dust settles, only one question remains. Was it fate, deception, or the judgment of a God long silent? The battle is lost. The prophecy fulfilled. Saul, once anointed, now broken, kneels upon the blood-soaked earth. His sword trembles in his hands, his final escape from a fate he sealed himself. The heavens remain silent, the voices of the dead have spoken, and the weight of his choices crushes him. With one final thrust, the curtain falls on a tragic king, a man who sought the voice of the divine but found only the echoes of his own downfall. And as the winds of Gilboa howl through the night, one question lingers: was it divine, or was it deception? Kindly share your thought in the comments section below. Darkness loomed over Israel, not just in the night sky, but in the hearts of its people. The kingdom stood at the edge of ruin, its soldiers weary, its king, a man once chosen by God, now a shadow of himself. The Philistine armies had gathered, their war cries echoing through the hills, ready to crush Israel once and for all. And at the heart of it all stood Saul, Israel's first king, now abandoned, desperate, and drowning in fear. Saul had once been a mighty ruler, anointed by the prophet Samuel, called by God to lead his people. But over the years, pride, disobedience, and fear had driven a wedge between him and the Almighty. He had defied God's commands, and in return, God had turned away from him. No longer did the Spirit of the Lord rest upon him. No longer did divine wisdom guide his steps. He was alone. To make matters worse, Samuel, the prophet who had once been his voice of reason, his connection to God, was dead. The man who had anointed him, rebuked him, and pleaded with him to turn back to righteousness was now gone. And with his death, Saul felt an emptiness deeper than any battlefield wound. Still he sought answers. He pleaded with God, but heaven remained silent. He tried dreams, hoping for a vision, but none came. He turned to the Urim and Thummim, the sacred tools of divine guidance, but there was no response. He called upon the prophets, but none had a word from the Lord. Every door to heaven had been shut in his face. Saul had always feared losing control. And now, with every option exhausted, with his enemies closing in, with the silence of God weighing on his soul like an unbearable curse, he made a choice that would seal his fate forever. Desperation breeds dangerous decisions, and Saul, in his fear, turned to a source he had once outlawed himself: a witch, a medium, a forbidden voice from the realm of darkness. It was not an easy choice. He knew the law. He knew God had commanded that all who practiced divination, sorcery, or necromancy be put to death. In fact, Saul himself had driven these people out of Israel. And yet, on this night he was willing to break the very law he once enforced. Disguised under the cover of darkness, cloaked to hide his royal identity, Saul set out on a forbidden journey, one that would lead him straight into the shadows of Endor. He did not know what awaited him there. But one thing was certain: this was no longer a battle for Israel. This was a battle for his own soul. The night was thick with an unnatural stillness as Saul rode through the shadows, his face hidden beneath a heavy cloak. His heart pounded, not just from fear of the Philistines, but from the terror of what he was about to do. The same man who had once purged Israel of sorcerers and mediums now sought one in secret. The law of God was clear: "Thou shalt not suffer a witch to live." Exodus 22 verse 18. Saul had once upheld this law with righteous zeal, ensuring that all who practiced sorcery were cast out of the land. Yet now, driven by fear and silence from heaven, he stood in direct defiance of the very commands he had enforced. His hypocrisy burned like a hidden fire, but desperation had made him blind to everything except his need for answers. His journey led him to Endor, a place shrouded in secrecy and darkness. The very air felt thick, as if unseen eyes watched from the trees. Endor was no place for the righteous. It was a dwelling for the outcasts, the forbidden, the ones who thrived in the shadows. The presence of a medium here was no surprise, yet it was a chilling reminder that Saul had crossed a line he could never uncross. Finally, he arrived at the dwelling of the woman he sought, a frail, aged figure with piercing eyes that had seen more than any should. The Witch of Endor. Her face, lined with years of whispered incantations and forbidden knowledge, twisted in fear as she saw the cloaked figure standing before her. "You know what Saul has done," she said, her voice laced with caution. "He has cast out all the mediums and spiritists from the land. Why do you lay a trap for my life to cause me to die?" She was no fool. She knew the risks, knew the weight of her crime should she be discovered. Yet Saul's disguise held, and his desperation outweighed his pride. "As surely as the Lord lives," Saul swore, "you shall not be punished for this." The irony was bitter, swearing by the name of the very God he was disobeying. The witch studied him for a moment, her fears still lingering, but the promise of safety and the presence of gold were strong motivators. She nodded, cautiously stepping closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "Who shall I bring up for you?" Saul's voice trembled as he spoke the name. A name that had once brought him wisdom, rebuke, and guidance. A name he never thought he would utter in a place like this. "Summon Samuel for me." With those words, the room seemed to darken. The air grew heavy. The boundary between the living and the dead was about to be tested. And Saul had no idea what awaited him on the other side. The air in the witch's chamber was thick, suffocating, as the shadows seemed to shift and coil around them. The woman gasped, her body trembling as an unseen force overtook her. Her eyes widened in terror. "I see a spirit ascending out of the earth," she cried. Saul's breath caught in his throat. His pulse thundered in his ears. Could it truly be Samuel? Or was this something far more sinister? The figure emerged, shrouded in an otherworldly aura. The witch, now realizing the gravity of the moment, recoiled in fear. Saul, overcome with desperation, fell to his knees. He had sought the prophet and now he was here. But was it really Samuel? Or a deception conjured by dark forces? A question that echoes through time. For centuries, scholars, theologians, and believers have debated this moment. Did God allow Samuel to be summoned to deliver one final judgment? Or had Saul fallen prey to a demonic trick, a counterfeit spirit meant to lead him deeper into despair? Some argue that only God has the power to raise the dead, and this encounter, though terrifying, was a divine act, a final pronouncement of doom upon a king who had strayed too far. The message spoken was consistent with Samuel's warnings in life. Saul's kingdom was lost and he would soon perish. But others insist this was no prophet at all, but a deception from the forces of darkness. The Bible condemns necromancy, and God had already turned away from Saul. Why would he now speak through a forbidden practice? Could it be that this spirit, knowing Saul was already doomed, was a lying entity meant to torment him further? Whether divine or demonic, the message was clear, and it was terrifying. Tomorrow you and your sons will be with me. The Lord will also deliver Israel into the hands of the Philistines. Saul's body went cold. His worst fears were confirmed. There was no redemption, no second chance. His fate was sealed. The witch watched, a flicker of something strange in her ancient eyes, pity. The man before her was not the fearsome king who had hunted sorcerers. He was a ghost of himself, a desperate man already drowning in his own doom. She knelt beside him, her voice surprisingly gentle. "You must eat, my lord. Strengthen yourself before you go." But Saul said nothing. He could not speak. His throat was dry, his lips cracked. What use was food when the shadow of death already clung to him? Still the woman insisted. She and his terrified servants begged, pleaded, until finally he relented, not because he had hope, but because the human body, even when broken, still clings to survival. She brought out a meal, bread, roasted meat, food meant for a condemned man's last supper. A strange kindness from a woman he once would have killed. Saul ate in silence, barely tasting the food. The weight of what awaited him pressed on his chest like an iron hand. How does a man sleep when he knows the sun will rise on his final day? The night stretched on, its silence louder than 1,000 screams. The wind outside whispered through the trees, the stars hung heavy above. His soldiers dozed restlessly nearby, their breaths uneven as if they too could feel the hand of death creeping closer. Saul lay awake, staring into the darkness. His mind replayed every choice, every moment that had led him here. He had been chosen by God, anointed by Samuel, crowned as Israel's first king. Now he was nothing but a man waiting for the inevitable. Perhaps in another life he would have been different. Perhaps if he had obeyed, things would not have ended like this. But it was too late for perhaps. As the first light of dawn crept over the hills, Saul rose. His body felt like stone, his heart like dust. He gathered his armor, strapped on his sword, and stepped into the cool morning air. This was it. The final battle. The last chapter of his story. And by nightfall he would be no more. The psychological toll crushed him. The mighty king, once chosen by God, had become a desperate man chasing ghosts. His knees buckled, his spirit shattered. He refused food. He refused comfort. He had nothing left, only the unbearable weight of his own downfall. As Saul left Endor, the world seemed darker. The winds whispered of an ending he could no longer escape. Had he truly heard from the prophet? Or had he been deceived into hopelessness? The sun rose over Gilboa, its golden light spilling across the battlefield like a silent witness to the doom about to unfold. The Philistines were already advancing, an unrelenting tide of warriors with gleaming swords and ruthless hearts. Saul stood atop the hill, his gaze stretching over his weary men. Fear clung to them like a second skin. They had fought under his banner before, but never like this. Never with the weight of prophecy pressing down upon them. The battle erupted like a storm. Arrows rained down. Spears clashed against shields. The cries of dying men filled the air. Israel's forces crumbled, their strength no match for the Philistine onslaught. One by one they fell. Then the worst came to pass. Jonathan, Saul's beloved son, struck down in the chaos. Another son, then another, each life extinguished before Saul's eyes. The prophecy had begun its final, merciless course. Saul's breath came in ragged gasps. His world spun, grief and terror crushing him under their weight. The voices of the past screamed in his head, Samuel's warning, the witch's words, the silence of God. Then the enemy was upon him. Wounded, broken, and surrounded, Saul knew there was only one way left. He gripped his sword, hands trembling. He could not let the Philistines take him, could not let them mock him, torture him, defile him. His body ached, his spirit was shattered, but he had one last choice to make. With a final, shuddering breath, Saul fell upon his own sword. The first king of Israel was gone. His blood soaked the ground of the land he once ruled. A life that had begun with promise ended in tragedy. The battlefield grew quiet. The Philistines claimed their victory. Israel's forces scattered, leaderless and lost. The kingdom, once mighty, now stood on the brink of ruin. And far away, in the silence beyond death, Saul finally met the God he had spent his life running from. The story of Saul is not just one of a fallen king. It is a warning, a tragic testament to the price of disobedience and desperation. In his final hours, Saul sought answers, but he did not seek them from God. He turned instead to the forbidden, to the very thing he once condemned, and in doing so he sealed his fate. But let us pause and ask, was it truly Samuel who spoke to him that night in Endor? Hebrews 9 verse 27 makes it clear, "And as it is appointed unto men once to die, but after this the judgment. The dead do not return. They do not linger." The spirit that spoke was not the prophet of God, but a demonic deception, a cunning imitation meant to deceive Saul and, through his story, deceive the world. The enemy has always sought to blur the lines between truth and lies, twisting desperation into an opportunity for destruction. Saul, blinded by fear, fell into the trap. He listened to a voice that was never meant to guide him. And in the end he lost everything. His story stands as a dire warning. When God is silent, seek him harder. Do not turn to the darkness for answers. For the spirits of deception still whisper, still deceive, still prey on the desperate. But those who trust in the Lord will never be led astray. For his voice is the only truth, and in him alone is salvation. Reflective question. 1. Do you believe supernatural deception still exists today, and how can one discern between divine truth and deception? 2. What lessons can be learned from Saul's downfall about seeking guidance in times of desperation? 3. Why do you think God remained silent when Saul sought him, and what does this teach us about obedience and faith? Kindly share your thought in the comments section below. Moral lessons from the story of Saul and the Witch of Endor. 1. Desperation can lead to destruction. When fear takes control, we are more likely to make choices that go against God's will. Saul's desperation drove him to seek the very thing he once condemned, leading to his downfall. 2. God's silence is not an invitation to seek darkness. When God does not answer immediately, it is a call to wait, trust, and seek him deeper, not to turn to forbidden paths for quick solutions. 3. Disobedience has consequences. Saul repeatedly disobeyed God, and despite his regret, he never truly repented. This story highlights the irreversible cost of rejecting God's guidance. 4. The enemy masquerades as truth. The spirit Saul encountered was not Samuel but a demonic deception. Satan's greatest weapon is imitation, twisting truth to lead people astray. 5. Spiritual warfare is real. The battle between good and evil is not just physical but spiritual. Consulting forbidden powers opens doors to deception and destruction. 6. Power and position do not guarantee divine favor. Saul was Israel's first king, chosen by God, yet his downfall proves that without obedience and faith, even the mightiest can fall. 7. True guidance comes from God alone. No matter how lost or hopeless we feel, God's word remains the only true source of wisdom, direction, and salvation. Prayers. Lord, when I feel lost and desperate for answers, please teach me to wait on you. Strengthen my faith so that I will not seek guidance from the wrong places. Amen. Thank you for joining us on this epic journey. I believe you were inspired by this captivating story, so share your thoughts and comments in the comments section below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more faith-filled stories and divine inspiration. Till we come your way next time, bye for now.